Hi guys, welcome. Thank you for tuning in on a Saturday morning. I'm so happy to see everyone joining in. And we'll like in the meantime, I would love to know like which city you guys are joining in from. You can put that in the chat and we'll be happy to know that. In the meantime, let me introduce myself. I'm Avinash Bansal, your host today, and I am co-founder of TomoClub, which is an educational gaming company to teach social and emotional learning to kids. I personally have been a great advocate of the importance of mental health across every age. We tend to discount these matter a lot in early childhood, and through several studies, it's proven that these are the concerns which pile up to become bigger issue while growing up. Today, to address these issues, we have with us our pro guest, Bill Lennan and Barbara Tsai. They have co-founded the Haert program, where they teach mental wellness skills for life success to all the people of different walks of life. So they take preventive, skill-based approach to mental wellness. So thank you so much, guys, for taking our time and joining us. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Barbara, go first.
Okay, I'm just gonna do that. My name is Barbara, and I am an occupational therapist by training and focused especially on mental health. And so the past several years, actually, I've been working predominantly with teenagers from middle school, sort of 13 years old up to young adults, college age, 24, kind of 25 years old, working with them on managing depression and anxiety. And it was from this background of working in a hospital program with people who are, fairly seriously acute, that I learned the things that help people in this environment, the skills. We actually should be teaching them earlier, right? We should be learning these things in school or in our homes so that we don't get to the point where we're in hospital trying to learn them. So that was my background.
My name is Bill Lennan. I've spent 25 years in software development, software engineering and product management, large companies, small companies. I met Barbara 5 years ago. 3 years ago, she wanted to know how I got my software teams to do things that people said was impossible on a pretty consistent basis. And when I explained it, she said, "Oh, you use the skills we teach in the hospital." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "It's called dialectical behavior therapy." And I said, "Well, that's awesome, but I've never heard of it before. And tell me more." And so I got to learn language to help me explain to people and break down process and practices so that they can be successful. A quick story about this. My younger son, at the end of COVID, when he went back to school, he had a really bad case of social anxiety. He was going from a pretty small school into a school that was literally 5 times as big. And he wanted to be one of the stay-at-home students, and his mom and I both thought that was a bad idea. And so while he was reluctant and anxious, he and I talked about it. And so I used the skills and I created a solution for him. And we talked about it for around 30 minutes, and I got him to commit to a week of experimentation on campus. At the end of the week, he came back to me, but he had a totally new problem. He had too many friends, and he wanted help with time management. The names of the skills that we used are slow exhale breath, the big 3+1, values and priorities, a set of skills is an acronym called GIVE, and an opener. This is what's possible when you know all this stuff. That's it.
Wow. No, that's definitely quite a journey, guys. And so let's start today's discussion by understanding the basics of mental wellness. I think we all have a lot of different definitions in our mind, but I want our experts to start with defining the basics. Barbara, you're mute.
Noise in the background. There's some noise in the background. I was trying to manage that.
Yeah.
So you put in your description of the webinar a pretty good example of what people usually think about is mental wellness, right? It's or mental health. It's like you got to hit certain milestones as you're growing up and evolving. You've got to learn some social emotional skills so that you can interact well with others and effectively. And then you got to learn how to cope when there are problems, right? And it's that last component that is interesting, to cope when there's problems. And we see this in general healthcare as well. We only go to the doctor when we have a problem, right? We don't think, well, okay, so maybe we're increasingly now thinking about wellness more in the healthcare field. Same thing in mental wellness. So mental wellness is a complex equation that has many different influencing factors. And I think that we've been spending a lot of time and a lot of energy on the things that are kind of outside of our individual control and looking for ways to change a lot of the big societal issues that distress us. And this is an admirable goal. And it's also one that can make somebody feel very hopeless and helpless, because the magnitude of the change seems so great and the process seems so slow. And so I see a lot of the teens now coming in with a lot of distress around, I mean, they have their own personal distress and anxiety, but they also worry a lot about what's going on in the world and in society. And if we're focused a lot on the stuff that we don't have control over, it's very easy for us to get very distressed. So the point about how do we cope, when there are problems, it goes to the point of focusing on what's within our realm of control, what is outside and we have a little bit of control, and what's within us that we have a lot of control over. Because that last bit about coping with problems, it's much deeper than just basic stress management skills or what do we do, to put a Band-Aid on things. There's a vast portfolio of things that we can do ourselves to enhance our own mental wellness. And we're going to talk about this more today. So remember that concept for later, okay?
To put it in different language, I tend to think about root cause analysis. And I fully admit this is because of my engineering background, but I always think about what's the underlying, not just the surface symptom, but how do we get down to a fundamental level to solve a problem, not just get rid of what's going on top. And having a preventative approach and a skills-based approach is what allows us to do that.
Guys, I think that's quite a brief introduction, I would say, and that's really helpful. It definitely put things in perspective. But even though we all understand the basic concepts, it's actually very hard to identify the early stages of, I would say, anxiety, depression, or even problems in our child. So can you please share some ideas to us which can be really helpful takeaways for all of us, that how do we identify those early traces?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, it's a spectrum, right? There isn't one mode that everybody goes into when they're feeling anxious or depressed. And we aren't there necessarily 100% of the time. We kind of move up and down across this spectrum of from wellness to not wellness, right? From wellness to distress. And we do it within the year, within the week, within the day, sometimes within the hour. We might be sitting in a moment in ourselves and we go back and forth between being okay and not being okay. So I think we have to think about what are some of the things that appear when people are distressed and where can that go if it gets worse, right? So some of the examples of things that we see in teenagers as well as younger kids and as well as adults is things like emotional outbursts, right? And then we know with toddlers and with teenagers and even, with the kids in the middle, that emotional outbursts aren't unusual. They do them all the time. But when there's an outburst that seems larger than one might expect for the situation. Do you remember when your toddler would do a huge outburst in the middle of the grocery store because they couldn't have something, right? And they're on the floor screaming, kicking everything. And you're like, whoa, okay. I'm just going to sit here and wait for my little person to calm down and come out of that emotional outburst, because there's a huge wave of hormones and emotions and stuff like that that's passing through their body right now. And for me to try and reason with them right now is not going to be very effective. So I'm just going to leave them for a while, right? That kind of emotional outburst happens in teenagers and adults as well. We just don't handle it the way we used to handle it with the toddler. We expect people to continue to function even though they're in an emotional situation. So when we see an emotional outburst that's stronger than one might expect for the situation, that's a key to, how is that handled? How does that person handle that emotional outburst? Are they able to come back from it readily, or does it overwhelm them and take over kind of their lives, right? And why is it that they're responding so strongly to this particular situation? So that's kind of a nice indicator of when things might be going a little bit awry, depending on how they handle those emotional outbursts. Another example?
Yeah, absolutely. Outburst is definitely one strong, identifier which we can, keep a tab on.
Yeah. Anybody else have that experience? Yeah. Oh, more. Okay. And so another one is the experience of anxiety starts creeping up like your fight, flight response, right? When you go into that kind of, I'm scared, I'm frozen, I'm running away, I want to fight kind of response, that stress response, like it's life or death, that kind of fear or panic or anxiety to a situation, what might seem like an everyday situation or an activity, kind of like Bill talking about the anxiety that his son was experiencing when thinking about going back to school. For us, seems like people do it all the time, every day. They go back to school and now he's having this big fight flight response come up in him, right? It's similar to the emotional response, and it's focused around not just anger, but panic and fear. Right. So that kind of anxiety is another indicator that the way the person's handling their concerns may not be the best, the most efficient or effective. Okay.
So,
go ahead.
Oh, so I don't have Barbara's clinical experience, but I have two kids that I've been monitoring, right, since they were babies. I tend to notice when they start avoiding things, like they don't do emotional outbursts. They say they want something, but then they avoid it. Like it's their words and their behaviors aren't lining up. And I start to get curious about that because I want to catch it as early as I possibly can and figure out what do we do, right? So I notice when their behaviors and their words aren't lining up, and also when they're becoming very avoidant of things. My older son at one point in time started becoming more avoidant of social things at school. And he talked about wanting more friends, but he wasn't actually doing the behaviors that would get him those friends. So what he was having was also a kind of social anxiety. And so we worked that out. And I figured out how to help him with some skills also. But for me, it's about what's the earliest place I can find it. And one of my mental models is that everything in the world is easy for somebody, and getting from struggle to easy is a process of learning skills. We talk about swimming all the time in the water as a metaphor. And if you know how to swim and you fall off the boat, it's not a big deal. Matthew, when you're fishing, you can relate to this, right? But if you don't know how to swim and you fall off the boat, that's a whole other level of problem. Like you could die. The other thing about swimming is it's a gateway activity to a bunch of other stuff. So learning how to swim means you can go in the ocean, and you can maybe learn how to go surfing, and maybe you can learn whitewater rafting, and maybe you can learn water polo. It's like that with the skills that we're helping people learn, is that oftentimes they're gateways to bigger things, because if you don't know how to swim, taking up surfing is a really, really bad idea. But if you do know how to swim, then it's a whole lot easier. And so that's part of the beauty of people learning these skills and having these stacks available. And recognizing we're looking at our kids, what are the super early signs that something that is easy for one person is emotionally a struggle for them because they're avoiding it.
Got it. I got 3 points, definitely. I'm pretty sure Barbara has more to add. So we got emotional outburst, we got a fight and flight responses, and a feeling of avoiding things. Got it. Yeah, Barbara, you can continue.
Yeah, so that feeling of avoiding things comes along with reluctance to engage in anything that seems like unusual or uncertain in your daily life, like the new things. So if people are like avoiding those new things that they have to engage in order to move to the next step, you think about it as from a game perspective, right? As a game developer, you've got levels, and in each level, very often you've got challenges or things that they need to learn in order to get to the next level. That's the whole point. That's what life is about. We've just turned it into this little encapsulation of life in a game. But the idea of being reluctant to engage or to explore the game setting, to find out, what's over here, what's over there, this area, if you just stay in that area, that's an example of some kind of mental struggle or emotional processing issue that means that the person is not able to be curious and kind of expand out of their comfort zone. Couple more really quick so that we can move on is, and that ties in with this, the difficulty of being uncomfortable and the desire to cling to what's familiar and what we know. And then things like self-talk, which is really negative, or viewpoints like our opinions of ourselves that are negative and seem excessively focused on the downside of everything, as opposed to, and throwing away sort of our upsides, our positives. Couple more that go in line with that: fear of criticism or being judged, right? So if we judge ourselves first, somebody else won't judge us, right? So that's a good example of someone, if they're constantly judging themselves, or if they're afraid of being judged or being criticized or given feedback by other people, that's another example of having trouble to process what we essentially call growth mindset. And then the last one is about sort of this listlessness or lack of engagement or motivation internally, right? We need to be pushed by other people. We need to be rewarded outside. If you do this, I'll give you that. If you do this, I'll give you that. As opposed to, I have the curiosity to go and do this thing. So those are examples of areas that, there are like early developing concerns that are cracks in our mental wellness dam. And the factors involved in how we develop those, our responses to those kind of situations are, we very oftentimes, kids and adults misinterpret what's going on. They misread, they have their own internal dialogue. Other people have something else going on, and they will assume that they know what the other people are thinking. And, that changes their own emotions, that changes their thoughts, their behaviors and everything. And it helps them. It causes them to develop habits that might be ineffective. And very often we get this from our role models. And who are our role models when we're kids? Well, they're the people around us. Yeah, the people around us. And we've not been taught any better how to handle these kinds of things. We've developed them on our own. So, cut us some slack, right?
Yeah.
But, that's the point, is that our role models struggle if they're not trained explicitly or systematically. And so it's hard for us to know, what do we do in the situation when we get effectively thrown into the water off the side of the boat, and now we have to swim?
Yeah. No, those
I
are
suspect
actually,
we're going to be coming back to that metaphor a lot today.
yeah, absolutely. I think that swimming example is gonna come back around again and again. But Barbara, like a very genuine question coming from a parent's point of view, all these examples that you shared with us, whether it's emotional outburst, ignorance, lack of curiosity, lack of engagement, aren't those things pretty natural with kids? Like,
Yes.
like honestly, if they are doing so, we can assume they are being fuzzy, they are being lazy. How do we? So sometimes it becomes a problem of either we should take them too seriously, or should we let it go because to cut them slack, as you said, right? So how can you, I would say, break these complex mental health equation into a simpler model that will be giving me more perspective to it?
Well, let's kind of use this as an example. If your kids are constantly asking you for, when they're hungry, they want to eat something sweet, candy, pastries, some kind of sweet, sugary stuff that we all love to eat. And that's what they're asking for all the time. And they refuse to eat anything else. What would you do? Would you let it slide? I mean, in and of this moment right now, it probably is not such a big deal, right? Okay, maybe they'll get a stomach ache, but if you can kind of control the amount of it, maybe it's okay, right? But if they develop that as their habit and that becomes what they eat all the time, even if it's only a little bit, what happens over time is that they develop all sorts of health problems. Teeth start falling out. The body doesn't have the nutrients that they need, and they have these sugar spikes and all kinds of problems of eating food that's not necessarily healthy for us. So if we engage in behaviors that are not necessarily healthy for us, and we do it even a little bit all the time because we're developing a habit, that sets us up for struggles down the road when we encounter situations that require us to have developed other skills to handle a difficult situation, right? So I understand that a lot of this behavior is totally normal, and it completely is. And we need to learn a more effective response to it so that we can teach our kids that more effective response early on so that we can avoid the big problems later on.
No, I think that's a good example to keep in mind, that if it is happening persistently, then that becomes a red flag to notice, right?
Right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think about all the time is, what's my kid's desire? If anybody's watched the TV show Lucifer, his thing is, what's your desire? And people tell him the truth, right?
Yeah.
For me, figuring out how to drive behavior of my kids by channeling their desire has been really, really effective. My younger son got into cars, and so I had to struggle to get him to work on his car initially because he was afraid of criticism. He was afraid of getting it wrong. He was afraid of being bored. He was afraid of wasting time. He was afraid of being away from his friends. But because I, as his parent, was willing to do the struggle, now he has friends involved who want to come and help him work on his car. Mm-hmm. He's excited about working on the car. This is a place where we as parents can leverage our experience and our intellect and put ourselves in a place that's uncomfortable on purpose, because we understand the ROI of doing that work will, in the long run, help our kids have a better mental model, right? And now my son is now driving himself. He's pushing himself in the direction to learn a bunch of things related to his car because it's his desire. And so now he's learning all of these transferable skills, which for me is the huge win. And I don't really care how he learns transferable skills. I just want him to learn transferable skills. And so my job as his dad is to figure out how to get him in the right context. And even though up front it was hard for me, so I was like, nope, Sunday we're working on the car. You're going to spend 2 hours on the car. Now it's easy. Now he's like, hey, Dad, on Sunday, can we work on the car? Because I need to do this stuff. And I'm like, sure, no problem. Okay, great. We're in there. But getting the kid's desire to be the trigger of their learning. This is what Montessori schools do.
Yeah.
Montessori schools are really focused on kids will learn things based on their curiosity. And for me, that's been really helpful to get that intrinsic motivation for him to be doing things.
No, that's definitely a point.
Yes, please, Barbara.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yeah.
The encapsulation of that in a few words: make your why bigger than your butt. That's what it is.
This is definitely going as a caption of this recorded video.
The why must be bigger than the butt. And you can say butt with 2 T's and the kids really enjoy that. And that's okay if it helps them remember, right?
Wow. That's definitely, I'm going to remember for sure. My major takeaway from this.
Okay. Make your why bigger than your butt.
But I think we touched upon a topic that how we can break the complex mental health equation into a simpler model. I think, would you like to throw some light on that part? Both of you.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea of mental wellness, very often, out there on the internet, you see all kinds of self-help gurus and people that say, oh, you should learn breath, or you should learn yoga, or you should do self-care, or you should do this kind of exercise, or eat this food, or something like that. And all of it can be true. But the thing is that because we are complex beings, we have a lot of complex equation going into our mental wellness. So there's a lot of different factors involved. So here's an easy way to think about all those different factors and kind of group them into an easy looking image. I want you to imagine a triangle. And in the triangle, the top tip of the triangle is your body. And maybe the tip over here on this side is your emotions. And then the tip over here on this side is your thoughts. So on each of those tips, you've got your body, your thoughts, and your emotions. And those three categories of factors involve or affect your mental wellness, and then they affect each other, right? So here as an example, if you walk into, if you're going into a convention hall with lots of people and it's a networking event and you're supposed to go and meet up with them, right? And this is like kids going out on the playground. It's fun if you've got your friend with you, right? I've got my work colleague, we came together, let's go raid the dessert table or something like that. Let's go get a drink. It's fine if you feel like you have companion, but if you don't, what do you feel? You feel a little bit nervous, right? You think, oh, I don't know these people and maybe they're not interested in meeting with me, or, it's hard to meet people. It's hard to strike up conversation. So then my emotions go to, well, if it's hard, I must be distressed. I'm worried, I'm fearful, I don't want to be judged, I don't want people to reject me. And then what does that do to our bodies? Then we start, getting tense, and we start winding ourselves up, and we start feeling that kind of panic, fear, fight, flight response. So again, the whole point of body affects emotions, affects thoughts, right? This triangle. And you can think of it this way, as like a stable triangle, right? What makes the platform stable? So if you can affect that body response and say, okay, I'm going to calm down, going to use my breath, my slow exhale breath to slow down my heart rate, slow down my breathing so I don't feel so panicky. Okay, that controls my body. I'm going to tell myself that these people don't know me from Adam. They're not judging me. I don't know what's going on in their heads. They're just as nervous as I am. It's like that whole, imagine that you're speaking to people sitting in their underwear because it makes you feel, less nervous. So this idea, that might be a cultural thing, I don't know, or an old school thing. So the idea that you can tell yourself that your thoughts are, I don't want to say imaginary, but you're over amplifying the situation through kind of self-limiting thoughts, right? And then have that affect your emotions and say, I'm actually going to think of this as an enjoyable activity. I want to meet somebody new today. That could be fun. Who knows? And this is part of my goals. So now I'm working on making my why bigger than my butt, right? So all those things, the body, the emotions, and the thoughts combined together as a simple model to support the complex equation of mental wellness. This is called the cognitive triangle. We talk about this in psychology, is the cognitive triangle. You guys don't need to know that, but maybe giving it a name might help you remember. Cognitive triangle. All those areas, it's true that you have outer factors, things outside of you that can affect those three component areas. And you also have a lot of stuff within you to manage those three component areas. So it's about how do you learn the skills to manage those three so the stuff that affects you from the outside isn't so strong.
Got it. No, definitely. I think that triangle theory can definitely be very helpful to break this complex thing into a very simple model. And thank you for sharing that. So if I literally try to break down our discussion from a first principle thinking by asking why to everything, literally. So as we discussed the basics, we identified the early signs, and now the mental health equation. The thing that actually pops in my head is, what are the key skills like we as parents need to develop to support mental wellness? Would love to know your answer on that.
So I'm going to tell you in terms of areas of skills, because there are a lot of skills that we learn. We can, any complex activity, we can break down into smaller and smaller chunks, right? You think of cooking. Cooking is a complex activity because there's the preparing, there's the actual cooking, and then maybe there's the plating, or there's the organizing, buying of the food, and then the washing and the cutting up and the making it smaller. And maybe there's cooking steps involved, like first I have to saute this, then I have to combine it with that, then I have to let this sit for 3 hours, and then I got to cook it in a, like it can be very complex, and there's lots of steps. So how do we break down each step into a smaller set of skills? What is it to saute? What is it to dice onions, right? Same thing with mental wellness, okay? So here are the main areas, 5 of them, that we need to develop skills in so that we can think about, okay, this habit that I do, maybe in this area, maybe I need to learn a different way of doing it. So the first one is our own awareness of what's going on with ourselves. Self-awareness, right? Self-awareness is about being, you can use mindfulness or other kinds of strategies like the Haert skill to understand, why am I feeling what I'm feeling today? Why am I thinking what I'm thinking right now? And, break down where are my emotions going? What led up to this that put me in this emotional state right now? That's a self-awareness exercise. And the skills for self-awareness involve being able to internally look at yourself, like kind of come out of yourself like you're looking above yourself and say, oh, I am cranky right now because I didn't eat my lunch. I went straight from morning and I was rushing and all this stuff happened, and now it's 4 p.m. and somebody's asked me for something and I've exploded at them. That's kind of unusual for me. Why is that? Oh, because maybe I'm hungry. That's hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt, right? So we as adults need to do this from time to time, and we need to teach our children to learn to do this, because when we're out of touch with what's going on with our own self, it's hard to manage, right? We need to know to measure before we can manage. Okay, and that's not just our body, but that's an important part of it. It's also our thoughts and our emotions, being able to know them. So the second area, this is a huge area. It's called distress tolerance. Distress tolerance refers to being able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, to be okay with not being okay, as it were. Life challenges us all the time, and how do we level up our game just like we do in your video games? So that being uncomfortable is an evolutionary process that pushes us to change and evolve and to do things in a different way, to explore our options and maybe come up with a different response that is optimally more effective. And sometimes in many things, like particularly with regards to mental wellness, unless we've got good role models that are already doing this kind of thing and they help explain it to us, it benefits us to get some help from elsewhere to find those more optimal ways to respond to our distress. And this is like having a game walkthrough or a hack or a game guide. You've seen those. I'm sure you got to a level and you're trying to fight a baddie or a boss and you just can't seem to get it. So you go onto YouTube and you look for a game walkthrough, and there it is. They lay everything out for you. You got to get this first and then you do it that way, right? Same thing with us. It helps us as individuals managing our mental wellness to get a game walkthrough or a hack as to how do we handle a more difficult situation. And we need to, because when we get higher up into higher levels of life, so when the kids go from elementary school to middle school and all the emotions kick in, and then they go to high school and they've got all these thoughts in their heads, and then they go off to college and they don't have the support that they normally have, guess what happens? That they drop out and they come back. So yeah. So all right, so distress tolerance, super important for resilience, persistence, and self-confidence, because when you can handle difficult situations, you feel good about yourself. Fundamental. That's 2 areas. So self-awareness, distress tolerance. The third one is emotional management or emotional regulation. It's a fancy word. It's basically, how do we reduce our vulnerability to strong emotions and kind of smooth the roller coaster?
There's still backflush.
Say again?
And they've already cleared it, so it's got to be in the house.
I'm not sure. Is there a question guys, from anyone?
Is that just somebody talking? I mean,
yeah, that was somebody talking. I just muted them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought they were asking a question. That's okay. All right. So let's see, where were we? Emotional management. It's about reducing our vulnerability to strong emotions. So we're basically smoothing the roller coaster. So when our kids become teenagers, they get more emotional because that's what's going on in their bodies, right? Their hormones are driving them to be more emotional. And at the same time, their brains are evolving and they're shifting from, they're shifting to thinking about things in a logical, rational kind of way, using their their cortex, their frontal lobe, because that's evolving as they're teenagers, but they haven't totally done it yet. So they're in this process, and so they're starting to reason, but they're still using their emotions to reason. And that's why, especially during the teenage years, we have to teach our teens to manage their emotions better. And that usually is described as not just in the moment, that's more like distress tolerance, but also leading up to it. What can we do to make sure that we're in a good place, and not doing hard things when we're at the bottom of our battery, you know, like we're losing our charge. So there's a perfect example. It's Friday evening, you get home from work and your spouse says, why didn't you do the, you know, have you finished the blah de blah that needs to be done whenever, right? On Monday. And you're like, right? You explode back because you had a crap day at work, or it's been a long week. Yeah, you did that before, right? So why are we talking about this on Friday? Can it wait till Saturday morning after we've had a nice breakfast and you know, a rest and a, you know, glass of wine on Friday night, or whatever, you know, whatever works for you? Can we just pick times to talk about hard things when we know we're fully charged? This is a perfect example of emotion regulation, okay? The fourth one is interpersonal effectiveness. And this goes to the skills that facilitate good communication, especially in difficult situations, right? So again, that one about knowing when to pick to have a hard conversation to make sure that the person is available and listening and in a good place. That's a very important interpersonal effectiveness skill, but also just, you know, understanding where the person is. There are a number of skills that we can use to present our issues in a more sort of palatable, accessible way. So those interpersonal effectiveness skills, also important. And that's the fourth area. Then the fifth area, and this, well, they're all really important. I can't say one is more important than the other. The fifth area, walking the middle path. This is about really recognizing that other people's opinions have value as much as we're stuck to our own. And Bill can tell you that I'm guilty of doing this all the time. Walking the middle path to validate and value other people's opinions and other situations. Like, for example, when we get into the teenage years, as teenagers, they're trying to develop their own sense of identity, their own decision-making processes. And of course, as adults, we want this to happen. We just don't want it to happen until they leave our house, right? We want them to listen to us until they get to a certain age, and then they're going to go and do it their own way. Well, it doesn't work that way. We have to give them the gradual ramp up. So during this time period, when they're still with us, we have to have them learn how to walk the middle path. And we as parents have to learn how to walk the middle path with our kids so that we don't cause problems, you know, between us and our kids, where our kids have that problem when they go off, you know, on their own. So those 5 areas: self-awareness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and walking the middle path. Those are the main ones.
Wow.
You know, Barb, so, you know, to kind of add to that a little bit, you know, Barbara talks about role models. This is the thing that we as parents really have the big responsibility is kids are smart, like they're really smart, right? And if we're being hypocritical and we're telling them to do something that we won't do ourselves, they're going to see it and they're not going to trust us. And so I need my kids to trust me, right? Like that's a critical thing. So when I tell them they need to work out, well, guess what? I'm working out. And I tell them about my exercise. I tell them about when I'm distressed and I'm upset and things are really emotionally hard. So they get the distress tolerance message that despite it being hard, I'm still doing it. I always think about contextual conversations. And so with my kids, when I talk with them, I try to make sure that, and this is interpersonal effectiveness, I put things into their context as much as I possibly can, not my context. And so they get it, right? They get it at a very easy to access, almost physical level. And so it's not like I'm telling them to do something that's highly cerebral, that they've got to spend a bunch of time, or they may never actually connect to it. And again, this is back to, as parents, we have to model this for our kids, because otherwise they're just going to be like, dope, mom and dad are they're trying to manipulate me and I don't like it and I'm not going to pay attention to it. And so, one of our fundamental perspectives is if you're a parent, you got to learn this stuff and be able to do it yourself. I can tell you it completely changed the quality of my life when I started learning these skills 20 years ago. Even though I didn't actually have the structure, but each time I learned something, I was like, oh, this makes my life so much better. And it's the modeling for our kids that really helps them to get it to move forward, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Adding to both of your points, of course, you covered quite a lot of skills. But for me, one of the major takeaway was follow before you preach. So I think that summarizes what Bill was saying. And one thing that I realized during my personal journey, that all those we know about these things, we hear them all the time. Today also, this webinar, I'm pretty sure a lot of our audience who are listening right now and who will watch this later, they do know these things at some place. But the difficult part is to follow them on a regular basis. And that's why I always talk about having those mentors in life, having those non-opinionated or neutral people in your life, which can bring you back on track, right? And that becomes really helpful. And that is I think something which you guys do at Haert program as well, where you guys become an expert and walk with the parents in the day-to-day basis. Because I'm pretty sure all these things which you are saying, they look jargons when the real situation comes, because then it's a testing time to implement it. Let's say if the kid is being fuzzy about his grades or her career or anything, at that moment of time, are you gonna be able to remember all this and then come out like that? That is the hardest part. So I know I would love to know about your program as well, because I think that mentor part which I'm coming from was something that we discussed about it earlier as well. So
Right. So part of this is you have to practice this stuff every day, right?
yeah.
The idea, I think about compound interest. I'm not a math whiz, but the metaphor of compound interest works for me really well. For me, it's about how do I make my skills 1% better every day? Because 1% better every day is a really, really small increment to improve and to practice the skill. But at the end of the year, that's a 365% improvement from where I was to begin with. That's a gigantic change, right? Someone has a quote that we underestimate what we can do in a year, but we overestimate what we can do in a day. I think about what's the little tiny pieces I can do every day to get it better. And then a year later, I'm like, holy cow, I'm doing something I couldn't have imagined doing a year ago. And that's one of the key pieces is you don't just learn it and then not practice it. It's like swimming, right?
Yeah.
You could read a bunch of books on swimming.
You love swimming, I'm pretty sure about it.
What's that?
You love swimming, I must say.
Oh, I do. Yeah, total water rat. Yeah. But reading a bunch of books about swimming is not swimming. That's reading. Being in the water and getting wet and holding your breath and getting, all the stuff that's, oh, hey, I'm swimming freestyle. That's actually swimming. And so you have to do the practice so that when you fall off the boat, it's no big deal and you can laugh about it, right? Maybe it's cold, right? I'll grant that. But if you just read about swimming and then figure you'll practice it when you fall off the boat, you're dead. Yeah. That's it. Game over, right? You have to actually be practicing all the time and building up your skills a little bit at a time along the way so that when you do hit that really critical moment, it's easy because you've already got that stack of skills and you're like, oh, hey, I've already done this before. It's not a big deal, right? And that way, all this stuff makes sense.
Yeah, agreed. That's definitely helpful, guys. Would love to know about your program for, if you can explain that to our audience.
So the Haert program is basically, at its heart, a curriculum that puts together all of these kinds of skills that we talked about, those 5 areas of self-awareness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and walking the middle path. So the underlying foundation for that is the self-awareness and self-management, and that's where we start. We combine our online curriculum with Zoom workshops because we know that people, you can go and read this online. You can, we've pulled together, I as a professional have pulled together this information, have been teaching it to my patients for the last 6 years. And this is what's gone into our curriculum. It's possible to find it all out there, in the big wide world. And it's hard for people who don't know where to start looking. So that's one of the benefits of this program. It's all explicitly laid out in nice systematic ways. It's got names on it, so it's easy to remember. Teaches the skills and the strategies for each of these areas. And because they have names, the skills, they stay kind of in the front of your head, and it makes it easy for you to go, oh, you know what, this is the situation that she talked about. I can use this skill right now. And lo and behold, here I am at home and I'm having this difficult conversation, but the next day I'm at work and I'm starting to have a difficult conversation. Oh yeah, I could use that same skill that I remember the name of because it's in the front of my head, and I used it then and now I can use it now. So that's one of the reasons why the Haert program works, is because that systematic teaching. For a kid, this is about learning to manage themselves more effectively. For parents, this is about helping your child to use the skills to manage themselves. And the side product of that is that you start learning how to manage yourself as well. So what Bill talked about is, we need to practice what we preach effectively. It's very important. And I recognize that parents, very often they want to focus on their kids. They're really happy to put a lot of energy into their kids, and they come kind of second, right? We sacrifice stuff for our kids. So we spend time on our kids' stuff and maybe less on our stuff. So telling a parent that they need to take a course to be a better parent is sometimes challenging, because parents are like, well, I'm super busy, right? I don't have time to do this course that you want me to do. But if we're learning the skills to help our kids, and as a side product, as a side effect, we also learn the skills ourselves and use them ourselves, what better result can you have, right? So that's one of the benefits of this program, is that we work with the family as a unit, not just the kid, and expect the kid to learn stuff on their own without the support of their family network. They're easy to watch short videos, and we have the small group coaching, and what we teach has a broad evidence base, and I'll just blind you with science and throw out some names. We've got dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, radically open dialectical behavioral therapy, positive psychology, psychological neuroscience, health psychology, mindfulness-based stress reduction, sensory management, and habit training, all packed in there somewhere in our curriculum to help you respond better and work with your kids better.
Wow.
So putting that in a different perspective, just from my experience, so I spent 20 years piecemealing this together. So yes, you could spend 20 years piecemealing this together. If I've done it, anybody can spend 20 years doing it. The challenge that I had from leading software teams was I regularly had executives and other product managers ask me like, okay, we knew you weren't going to be able to do this. We knew that was impossible. Your team got done a month early. How? And I would say some version of, I take really good care of my people.
Yeah.
And they would want to learn, and I couldn't explain it, right? I could do it, but I couldn't explain it. I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, in terms of language that I could teach people, I didn't have a transferable skill set. And so, this went on for a lot of years, right? People would be like, hey, teach us how you did that. And I'd be like, I'm just doing me, right?
Yeah.
Which is not really an effective transferable skill set. Now I know how to actually explain to people exactly all the things that I've been doing for all those years to help my teams to continuously get better, perform better, output, all this stuff, and also to be at the executives to be on board and support everything we're doing. I now know how to explain that, right? And this goes back to Barbara's point about the name skills. I couldn't do that before because I didn't have the words to explain all this stuff that I had learned on the fly intrinsically, unconsciously, right? Kind of a corollary to that is that my dad has amazing distress tolerance skills, like off the chart, right? Because of how he grew up. He didn't know until a few months ago that he had distress tolerance skills because he'd never heard the terminology. And I've been talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. And all of a sudden, one day he goes, "Oh my God, I have amazing distress tolerance skills." And I'm like, yeah. And he says, "I never really put two and two together that all these things I've been able to do was because of my distress tolerance skills." Because no one ever said that when I was growing up. And so when I was a kid, my dad had no way to teach it to me, right? I had to go figure this stuff out on my own because my dad didn't have the language to be able to talk to me about values and priorities and halt and all these other skills. So I had to go struggle a ton. I'm having a little bit easier time with my kids because I now have language that I can teach them.
No, that's definitely a very important point, actually. It's coming from the first point, which Barbara mentioned, self-awareness. So, and I think I'm very happy to share that with other audience as well, that Barbara and Bill, they are working in getting parents aware of these skills through the therapy session, through the counseling, something similar we're trying to do, but with kids at TomoClub. So I will take a liberty to introduce that as well to my team. Not promoting, but slightly promoting that what we're trying to do at TomoClub is we are creating educational games, and these games are multiplayer. So again, the concept is similar, that they do an activity together in the live call, like a video call. And when they talk about it, when they share their knowledge about it, then they start to learn. Just for reference, I'm going to share a quick video. It's going to be a 2-minute video for everyone, and it will explain that how our session actually works. So give me a second. Yeah. So yeah, that's I love to see that video again and again. But you saw that in that video as well, that exactly what you're saying, that kids do things very naturally, but when you give a name to it, when you give a word to it, that helps. And oh, I just realized you could not hear the audio part, didn't you? Oops, never mind. But I hope there were the subtitles. So that's what we're trying to do. And now, since we are running out of time, I would love to open up the questions for everyone. Actually, we got quite a bit of questions. So
There is one question in the chat I would like to address.
Yes, sure.
Live, right? And this is about how do you handle a child that experiences anger? And this is the same for a child as for a teenager or as for an adult. If we try to be reasonable and rational when we're extremely distressed and upset, like angry, it's very hard. So it's hard to tell somebody, you know, calm down and think about this in a rational way when they're like blowing up, right? So the first thing we have to do actually is to address that anger and the distress and say, wow, you must be really angry about something. Something must have really set you off, right? What can we do to help you calm down right now? I can see that this is really bothering you. So you validate the kid and you try and find ways to help them become more calm. And you do it to just tell them to calm down is invalidating. We actually have to say, you know, I can see you're angry and there must be a really good reason for it. So let's find a way for you to get over that anger or to let that anger dissipate. So then we can talk about what that reason is, right? And that allows them to let go of the emotion because they feel they're being heard. Otherwise they'll hang on to it because you're just telling them stop being angry. And they're like, no, I have to be angry, right? So validating and then helping them manage the emotion, handle distress, right? Distress tolerance skills. So that's the first step. And in there, there's a little bit of self-awareness exercise, right? Because you're telling them, I can see you're fuming, you know, you look like you're about to hit something or throw something. I can see that you're really angry, and it helps them recognize that emotion in themselves. And once you get past the distress tolerance, then you can think about, okay, well, let's explain why. Why is it that you're angry? What is it that has happened? What's pushed your buttons? What is it that you're interpreting of the situation? Did, you know, somebody do something that made you feel mad or hurt your feelings or whatever it was? And in that process, us as parents, we have to take a step back and not say, oh, but what Jimmy did was okay because you did something really bad. Right? When they're expressing their anger, you have to allow them and validate, you know, Jimmy did something that was really hurtful and I can see how you would feel about that, you know, right?
Yeah.
So first address those feelings and understand where they're coming from, and then talk about, well, what escalated that situation? So those are the processes. And, you know, somebody talked about using art to help express their emotions in a healthy way. And this is actually helpful for a lot of people. Using their art to express their emotions is helpful. And we also want to teach our kids to use their language to express their emotions with other people, right? Because when they get to be 27 and they have a partner, they can't just use art to describe how they're feeling to their partner when they're upset with them. They actually have to be able to use their words to interact with, you know, a work colleague or whomever, to say, so you did this and this frustrated me, and that's, you know, maybe my anger is not appropriate response. So I'm going to try and manage that. But this is what started the cascade. So let's talk about what, you know, what did I do to contribute that to that situation, or how did that all happen, right? So using your words, that's a big part of it.
No, that's definitely an interesting point. And we'll pick up one more question. I think Izok, that is Alexandra, she has put up quite a few questions, but let's start with this one. Any one of you, Bill or Barbara, can take it up. That what key skills should we teach and how to a child who struggles with emotional regulations? Especially, we already did this, anger, right? I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
How can we shift their motivations from external rewards or acknowledgement to internal? I think this is interesting.
Yeah, that's a big one that has to do with criticism. And I think Bill can speak to that a lot.
Yeah. So, you know, it goes back to what's the kid's desire, right? When I was 12, I took up scuba diving and I learned Bernoulli's Law. And I learned a bunch of mechanical stuff about how scuba regulators worked. And I learned about gaseous saturation in liquids, right? When I went to high school and they started teaching that, I already knew it all, right? It was like all of a sudden this stuff from in my high school science class was super boring because I'd learned it years earlier. If you give kids a thing that fires up their brain, they will learn all kinds of stuff. What most of us don't recognize is that, and we don't teach our kids this well enough, is that real world experiences are much more alive in terms of brain chemistry, and they're much more exciting than a video game is. And yes, it's hard. Like my son is learning that playing with his car and driving his car is way more exciting than any video game he ever used that had a car driving simulation, right? He doesn't want to play GTA anymore because he wants to drive a real car on real roads. Now he wants to get into car racing, which I'm 100% behind for him, right? But giving our kids those kinds of real world experiences where they recognize that it's way more fun and exciting, and then they want to learn more about it. They want to understand it better. This is the whole thing with internal motivation, right? And so I don't want to try and tell my kids what to do, right? I want to support them in being productive. I want to make sure they're not eating candy or the equivalent of eating candy, but their desire and their drive to be productive is their drive. It's not my drive, right? So my older son thought he wanted to be a neuroscientist. He's in college. He's decided that that's not what excites him. But right now what he realizes is he really likes writing. Completely different thing, right? I'm like, wow, that's a shift. And I 100% support his writing, and I encourage him to write more because writing's a good thing to be able to do, right? And I don't really worry about long-term where he's going to end up. I want him to really pursue his skills right now and be happy and confident about it, because I recognize that skills are highly transferable. He could become a copywriter. He could be writing books in the future. He could be ghostwriting books. There's lots of stuff he could be doing. I don't want to tell him to be a neuroscientist right now, right? Because back to somebody else's question, the intrinsic motivation is what makes him comfortable, not what makes me comfortable.
Yep.
And so once he's got the intrinsic motivation, he's going to learn all kinds of stuff, right? You know, the amount of stuff that I learned when I fell in love with diving when I was 12 was amazing, right? There's all kinds of stuff that I picked up that a lot of adults still haven't picked up, right? Because I was like, you know, I deep dove because of my desire. So if we have to the thing is to get kids comfortable in those contexts, right, where they'll go and dive deep on things, and we need to kind of help them, you know, to get there, to find a really good starting point, and to go play with it, and you know, maybe it's uncomfortable for us to begin with, but so what, right? We're adults, we're parents, we should have our own distress tolerance skills. If we don't, there's a course that'll help you with that we teach. But you know, that's the thing, is getting out of our own heads and letting them go find their desire. And again, not having candy, right? You know, you can't spend your life playing video games. You need to actually be in the real world doing things.
Yep. Right. No, that's definitely a very good answer, Bill, on that. And I think we are definitely exceeding our 1 hour thing. Any ending remarks that, you know, Barbara, Bill, would you like to give to our audience on the entire topic of social and emotional well-being of kids?
Yeah, I would like to do a little overview, very as brief as I can about this. One of the things that really affects teens and kids is when parents affects their motivation and their curiosity is when parents criticize kids and tell them that what they're doing doesn't have value and what they should be doing is something else, right? Something, whatever that something else is. And that shift of you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing that, is what is one of the key factors that stops kids from having internal motivation or curiosity, because somebody else is telling them what they should be doing. The minute we have to rely on somebody else to tell us what to do, we start losing our own intuition, our own motivation internally, our own drive, and we just wait for somebody else to tell us what to do, which may or may not be useful when you become a cog in the works. And you know, how much cog are you, right? How much creativity do you engage in as you're working for somebody else? So I think that we just have to be more careful to try and look, and as parents walk the middle path to say, you know, what is my child doing right now? Is because even if they're spending a lot of time on games, maybe we try and look for the things on the games that they're benefiting from, like exploring new realms or touching everything and trying stuff, right? And saying, okay, well, this is great in this space, and can we encourage that in the real world space as well somehow, so that we balance, but we recognize that what they're doing in that space is actually valuable. We just have to encourage it somewhere else. So that's the middle path, right? Validate what they're doing and then encourage them to do it elsewhere as well.
Yes.
I'm hoping that example can be a fundamental shift in how we view our interaction and our guiding of our children, to make sure that what they're doing, we recognize the value in, so that they do more of their own stuff and their internal motivation, is developed.
Thank you so much for that brief. Bill, any ending remarks?
Now, this is it's education for everyone, right? I didn't know this stuff. My parents didn't know this stuff when I was growing up. As I said, my dad couldn't teach me distress tolerance, even though he was really, really, really good at it. As parents, really, if we want to, take care of our kids, it behooves us to learn all these skills, to model these skills for our kids, and to help them understand the value. And really, one of the coolest things for me is when my kids tell me they're teaching their friends the skills to help their friends with their anxieties, right? Because that's the network effect. And that really creates a much better world for all of us.
Yes, that's true. I would like to also end it with a statement that, being mentally healthy during your childhood actually means, reaching a development or a milestone, like an emotional milestone. And like the way we learn how to manage our social skills, it becomes a coping mechanism for overall problems. So I think there's a lot of synergy when I discuss with you guys about Haert program, about TomoClub, about several new programs out there. I'm happy that they are coming up every day. So I think it was amazing interacting with you guys. And thank you everyone for joining in on a Saturday morning. And I hope that we come up with more and more better discussions and guests for the next time. Thank you so much for joining in. Have a good day, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.